Okay, hi. So in honor of Nonfiction November, I wanted to do a reaction video, which I haven't done before, of me reacting to the 22 nonfiction books I said I wanted to read in 2022. So we're at, when I'm filming, we're midway through October. So 10 months into the year, I should have read a decent number of these. So we're going to react. We're going to see which ones I read. I'll talk about the ones I read and if I like them or not. And then probably some of the ones I haven't read will get added to my TBR for Nonfiction November. So we'll get started. I don't know if you guys are like over-ear headphone people or in-ear, but the in-ear ones drive me nuts. So we're over-ear. That's the best we write on here. Okay, let me see if I can do this. You can do this. You are a millennial. You know how technology works. Okay, so today we're going to talk about the nonfiction priority reads on my TBR for 2022. Okay, so I've been slowly getting into nonfiction a little bit more. I think that when I started reading post-college, everything I read in college was nonfiction. So I was very burnt out on that idea and wanted to just read for fun. And nonfiction, as time has gone on, has got more fun to read. So it's my percentage of books that I've been reading that's nonfiction has slowly gone up. So for 2021, it was at about 15% of what I was reading. I don't have a goal of where I want that to get to, but I do want to prioritize reading nonfiction throughout the year. So I started writing down a list of priority reads, and it ended up being 21, and I'm like, I might as well find another one and make it 22, and we can do the 22 books in 2022, which, BookTube loves that. The first book, this one has this is so funny to watch. I agree with everything I said still, so I'm consistent 10 months later, and yes, we love that on BookTube. Been on my TBR for 5 or 6 years, and it's pretty intimidating for me, and that is Oh, Albany. It's by William Kennedy, who won the Pulitzer something for Ironweed, but he is from Albany, New York, which is the city I live near. And so basically any used bookstore you find around here, you will. Okay, I'm going to stop listening to myself here. I haven't read this. I think I end up saying that this is the one I'm least likely to pick up. Still true. It's still sitting on my TBR. I think I consume most of my nonfiction via audio, and I can't get an audiobook for this through my normal methods. So, yeah, I still have not read this. Let's find the next one. Next one I want to read is Are Prisons Obsolete by Angela Davis. Social justice nonfiction is a large majority of this TBR. I read The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander a few years ago and really loved it. And this is a book that I saw recommended. Okay. Yeah, I haven't read this one either. It was on my TBR for Blackathon in February, and I just didn't get to it. I think I had 3 books on my nonfiction books on my TBR in February, and I chose the other 2. So this one still is on my TBR as well, but yeah, haven't got to it. We're not doing good so far. The Death and Life of Great American Cities. So this is a relatively old book. It was published in 1961, and it's really about urban planning. And my partner got a master's in urban and regional development, so basically planning. And he really enjoyed it, and it gave him, and really his whole degree gave him a totally different perspective on the world around us, the human-made, man-made world around us. Yeah, okay. So this one I did interested in kind of read. I read it, I got to about, I think the 90% mark, and I DNF'd it. I don't mind DNFing books. That's I actually enjoy DNFing books. If I don't feel like I'm getting fulfillment or satisfaction from a book, then I will put it down. This was one of those books that it was really interesting because it's very academic, and the writing is not super academic, but it's dense. So you really have to sit and listen or read it pretty intently, and that be your like sole focus. And at points, I would have to like reread to understand something. And each chapter was about something different, and there are a few parts to the book that kind of focused on different things. It really just got to a point where I was just like, I gained everything I wanted to gain from the book, and I just didn't really have any satisfaction at that point when I was picking the book up, so I chose to put it down. But I still think it was a good book to read if that's something you're interested in. A lot of the vernacular that was used and some of the ideologies are very old school due to when it was written, so it's just something to keep in mind. But yeah, it wasn't that I disliked the book at all. All right, the next one is The Second Amendment, a biography. This is one of the more contentious amendments in the United States, the right to bear arms. But I don't really want to go into my beliefs on that. We will just say that they are fairly complicated, and I don't have a straightforward idea on, I would just say my thoughts on them are complex. Fundamentally, I find the concept of firearms to be extremely fascinating, just like the mechanics of them themselves and how they trigger and different types of trigger actions and stuff like that. And this is going to just be a look at the Second Amendment itself. So, okay, cutting myself off again. Okay, yeah, so this book I did read. It is much more about, like it explains, the actual Second Amendment. It gets into a historical context of like what the era looked like when this amendment was written. You know, like what did militias look like and what did the colonies look like at the time, leading up to the writing of the Constitution. I felt that the author's biases definitely made their way into the writing. And then it didn't really it was a lot of like little facts. It was a lot of, and this happened on this date, and this person did this thing, and this person did this thing, and a lot of judicial like explanation of the law, which is how law is interpreted, obviously. So a law gets contested in some capacity, it goes to court, a court case is made, a judge makes a decision, and then that decision is then used when another court case comes up. And so it was very much, and then this person did this, and dates and dates and dates. I really don't like dates and dates and dates. I much more prefer you to provide me like information, but have like a thesis at hand that you're really like, it's more of like a critical analysis of information, which wasn't really the presentation of this. So I didn't really feel like I learned a ton, although I did learn things. I can say I came away from that book knowing more about the Second Amendment than I did going in. The next one is Who Wrote the Bible? I want to say I saw this at Mara on Books Like Whoa. Okay, stopping myself again. I don't need to get into what it's about. It's called Who Wrote the Bible. Okay, this is one that I also DNF'd, but I plan on going back to it. So a DNF to me is like I abandoned the book and I'm never returning. This is like a soft DNF, I guess. I was listening to it on audio, as I do with most of the books that I read for nonfiction, and it wasn't working. Like just the information that was being laid out, like the how the author goes about proving their argument of there are many different people who wrote the Bible, is by saying like, okay, let me back myself up. First off, I am not super familiar with the Bible. I think that in order to truly gain what you need to out of this book, you have to have more of an understanding of like works in the Bible, because I've only read like maybe Genesis and the Gospels of two of the Gospels, and this gets into specific stories and how stories are told in multiple ways. and then why it might be told in that way. So having more familiarity with the stories, I think, would be helpful. But really, this just came down to, even though I don't have a good context for the Bible, I would want to actually physically read this one, because it goes and it'll show one passage that they're saying it was written by author A, and then they would show another passage that's the same story and they'd say it's written by author B. So seeing it, like visually seeing it, would be easier for me to intake. But yeah, I would say this would, without having read the whole book, just from my experience, if you've actually had encounters with the Bible, more so than myself, like if you grew up in the church or something, I think that this would be a better and more interesting read, and you're going to gain a little bit more from it because you have the context that I think is needed. So the next one is more of going down the memoir, but it does say it's an essay collection. That's the Collected Schizophrenias. I saw this on a bunch of people's favorites lists a few years back, and have had it on my list of like my TBR this whole time. I just haven't really gotten around to reading it. But it's essays on the author's diagnosis of schizophrenia, I believe, and then moving onward. And I've heard it's really well written and very powerful, so I'm excited for that. Okay, the Collected Schizophrenias I have read. I remember really enjoying it at the time. It's very harrowing. She really takes you deep into her experiences with schizophrenia, kind of the episodes or schizophrenic disorder that she has, and the episodes that she goes through. And you see her multiple points in life, and her pre-diagnosis and her post-diagnosis. But I read this maybe in May, and it's not really a book that stuck with me. So I appreciated it for what it was, but I had actually forgotten I had read that this year until I just watched this. Next one, another memoir, In the Dream House by Carmen Maria Machado. This one also, a few years ago, was all over on people's favorite lists of nonfiction. I've heard really great things about the writing. I've heard that it's mainly about a queer relationship that is toxic, and kind of breaks down this ideology that is kind of permeated mainstream culture of queer relationships being happy and not having the same potential for chaos that straight relationships have. I feel okay, I have read this as well. This one was, again, really powerful. I think that the power came from the way it was told. So it was told in second person, of you being Carmen Maria Machado. So you did this, she did this to you. And it really puts you in the position of being in this toxic, queer relationship, and kind of the leading into the toxicity. Again, it starts at the beginning of the relationship, where the love is kind of developing and blooming and blossoming, and then you have the cycle of abuse begin, and her not really know what to do with it, and she brings you into those dark places that she's at. There's a lot of, I remember, this is something that annoys me specifically. I remember there's a lot of pop culture references that I wasn't necessarily a fan of, but aside from that, and I don't think that would bother most people, I thought it was a really powerful book. Okay, the next one is The Undocumented Americans. This is, again, another memoir, and it is about a woman who is undocumented living in America and just writing on it. I believe I have not read this, but I think this would be a really good one for Nonfiction November. One of the words, the 4 prompts, is border. So I think that would be a good tie-in to a nonfiction TBR, and I actually forgot this was on my TBR as well, and am very excited to read it. The next one is The End of Policing. I believe I also saw this at Mara at Books Like Whoa's channel. So the idea of, okay, I'm not going to listen to myself talk about this one. I have read it. Mixed feelings about this. I feel like if you came into this being like, I know nothing about policing and this idea of defund the police, and I want to learn more, then this might be a good book. But what I found is it was more of a collection of all of these ideas around policing. So like ICE at the borders, prostitution, what else? Like prison systems, the judicial system. And there are books that are referenced, like The New Jim Crow is referenced within this text, that it kind of just summarizes very briefly. So to me, you might as well read for every chapter, there's probably a book about that concept where you're going to just dig much deeper into things. But as an example, I haven't read any books about ICE or border, the invention of the borders. And so it referenced a book in that section that I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to read that one now because I know that the other books referenced in the other sections are good and delve deep into these topics. So it's just like a very superficial read, I guess. And it doesn't really like convey, it talks about all these topics and then it doesn't get you deep into the point. Like it's not taking those concepts and then saying, well, this is why we need to make this system. It just kind of talks about them and then overlays the idea of this is why we should defund the police. But it would have been more interesting if we kind of like built ourselves up to how and why to defund the police. It also, I forget, talks about like kind of like the beginning of policing and like the ways that police forces have been used in the past, which was also like an interesting part of it, I think, for me, because I hadn't read anything like that before. Okay, the next one is Medical Apartheid, The Dark History of Medical Experimentation on Black Americans from Colonial Times to Present. Yep, I read this. It was really good. It was long. It had a lot of different examples through time, a lot of detail. It was very dark. It has like the I guess known like the syphilis experiments, but also goes back a lot farther to the invention of gynecology and just like the utilization of Black bodies in life and in death in ways that are non-consensual. Really good. Really great look at a medical lens, the cultural implications of something that happened in the medical space. It also talks about experimentation. It provides my memory card was full, so I got cut off. I know I was talking about a medical apartheid. I think that I was just rambling in circles and that I have nothing else to add on it, but it was a good book and I recommend it. Okay, and this one is A History of My Brief Body by Billy Ray Belcourt. Billy Ray Belcourt is I haven't read this one. I keep putting it on TBRs and then I don't really film TBRs that often, but TBRs in my head, and I keep not reading it. So I would like to, so this is an Indigenous author, I would like to do some crossovers. I don't know if Indigathon is happening this year, but I do plan on still reading books by Indigenous authors in November along with nonfiction books. So this would be like a crossover. It's a memoir. I believe it's more of an essay collection. So I do still plan on reading that, hopefully still in 2022. Okay, next one, Our History is the Future. Standing Rock versus the Dakota Access Pipeline and the Long Tradition of Indigenous Resistance by Nick Estes. I saw this on Brian at Bookish's channel. I just cut myself off. I also haven't read this. I also plan on reading this in Nonfiction November and doing a crossover with Indigathon. The next one, America for Americans, A History of Xenophobia in the United States by Erica Lee. So this is on my list because I read her book, The Making of Asian America, in 2021, and I really loved it. I thought that the scope was really well done. I thought that even though she focused on so many different things, she still put it in a really nice order where it was easy to consume. And so I saw that she had another book out, and I wanted to pick it up. I have read this, and I thought it was really good. The Making of Asian America remains in my head a lot better than America for Americans, but this does go through like the history of xenophobia, and like how xenophobia has changed, like based on the ethnic groups that were coming into the United States at the time. It does also talk about like cultural appropriation as a form of xenophobia, like kind of taking over someone's culture, making it in part of your own, and in order to like supplant it, essentially. And then you just see like the repetitious cycle of the same slander and the same coined terms, like they're taking our jobs and that type of stuff, just being used over and over again for different ethnic groups throughout time. And then you see like the ethnic groups being kind of brought into whiteness. So I thought it was really interesting and would highly recommend. Okay, the next one, back to memoir, is Sitting Pretty: The View from My Ordinary Resilient Disabled Body by Rebecca Taussig. I saw this at Mercedes channel, Mercedes Bookish Musings, Mercedes Musings. Most people probably know who Mercedes is. That's funny. I have read this. I think this was the first book I read in 2022, actually. This was just had a perspective on being like living life in a disabled body, and like kind of like the difficulties with that, but also the joys in that. It's her experiences like working with high school students, her experiences with her partner, her experiences doing tasks that able-bodied people might not find difficult, and then kind of her exploring it through her lens. She has had I think it was a disease that made it so she can't use her legs, that came upon her when she was fairly young. So she's kind of lived her whole life like this, and just her experiences, less through youth, though she does talk about that, and more in her adulthood. So again, I would recommend it. I thought it was good. Along the same lines, I want to read Care Work: Dreaming Disability Justice. This I've seen very highly recommended at Mariana Mas Books channel. This is a essay collection discussing disability justice. This author had an essay in disability visibility that I read about a month ago, and I really enjoyed that collection. So I'm looking forward to reading this as well. I have not read this yet. Another one that has been on a few, I keep thinking back to wanting to read, and then I just don't make the space for it. But another one I do really want to get to. The next one on my list, which I believe is the only one I have in translation, is Migratory Birds by Mariana Oliver. I'm just going to read you the synopsis. In her prize-winning debut, the author trains her gaze on migration in its many forms, moving between real cities and other more inaccessible territories. Language, memory, pain, desire, and the body. With an abiding curiosity and poetic ease, Oliver leads us through the underground city of Cappadocia, explores the vicissitudes of a Berlin marked by a historical fracture, recalls a shocking childhood exodus, and recreates the intimacy of the spaces we inhabit. Okay, so I haven't read this one. This one would also work for Border. I think another one, no, Border, because it's translation, Border, migratory, like you're going across borders when you migrate. This one also sounds really interesting. Again, no audiobook, so probably why I haven't gotten to it, but I think that would be another good one for me to get to in Nonfiction November. Okay, so this one I added to my TBR because I feel that I don't really know anything about the Pacific Islands or any of the Polynesian Islands, any of the islands within the Pacific. Culturally, historically, it's just a big gap for me. So the book I am going to first pick up that discusses this is Decolonization and the Pacific, Indigenous Globalization and the Ends of Empire. says she demonstrates the way imperial powers conceived of decolonization as a new form of imperialism. She shows... Okay, so I have not read this book, but I also don't know if I'm going to read this one first. It is a book that I can't really get through many means. Like the only place I've been able to see that I could order it is on Amazon, which I avoid doing with books that most of the time I try. But there is another book, I'll put it on the screen, that I might get to first. It's not by an Indigenous author or author from the Pacific Islands, which I try to look for own voices in my narratives and in my nonfiction. But it's more easily accessible, so I might try to get to that first and then move over to this, which I think is a little bit more niche in what it's trying to look at. So I don't actually anticipate getting to this in 2022, but I would probably roll this over into my nonfiction reading for 2023. Okay, the next one I want to read, which has been on my TBR for years as well, is Push Out to the Criminalization of Black Girls in Schools. It kind of just, from my understanding, speaks... We don't need to talk about what my understanding was because I have read that book. And I enjoyed it. It is kind of like two very disconnected sections from my memory. I read this in February. One where it talks about like more of like a, I don't want to say narrative, but she talks through like the ways that girls or Black girls are left behind in schools. They get pushed out, they get pushed into other things, they get pulled into other things, and that like the school doesn't really like protect them. She gives a lot of statistics about Black girls being reprimanded at different rates than white girls. And then in the second half, it's more about like interacting with actual teenage girls who are facing these things. And it's more of like a discussion with them. So she talks about talking with these girls and is kind of just like reiterating their conversations. So I liked both sections, but there was a disconnect between the two. It almost felt like two different books. Okay, next one, The Beginning and End of Rape, Confronting Sexual Violence in Native America by Sarah Deer. I saw this at Kim from Native Lady Book Warriors channel. She did like a top 10 nonfictions. I don't need to keep listening. I haven't read this yet. This is another crossover one that I would like to read in nonfiction in November, but subject matter, of course, it's very dark. But I do still plan on getting to this in 2022. Okay, the next one is What's Your Pronoun? Beyond He and She by Dennis Barron. This one I definitely did see at Mara Books Like Woe's channel a few years ago. And from what I remember, it is about the concept of pronouns and how, like, looking at that through time and how they've changed. I'm hoping it gets into different languages and different language uses of pronouns. I can talk about this because I have read it. And it doesn't get into different conversations about different languages. It says at the beginning that it mainly focuses on English, but it does take you through time with pronouns and kind of like the cyclic nature of pronouns like showing up in time and like the coinage of pronouns. The like different pronouns have been recoined multiple times. I liked this book. However, this book did something that annoys me in nonfiction, and that is when you have your introduction chapter and then you explain things that you're going to do, and then you don't actually do all of those things. Like, why? Like, how did this get missed in editing? Drives me nuts. But one of the things that it said is that it might help you, like, understand your own pronouns better. Or at least that's how I recall it. And I just disagree with that being, like an actual intention of the book. By reading this and understanding pronouns, you may develop a better understanding of this one may work for me or this one sounds right, but it's not like it's workbooking you through that process. It's just by reading that you may gain that, which it's misleading in an introduction. So it's a small gripe, but I'm picky, so I'm going to point it out. Another one is The Color of Law, A Forgotten History of How Our Government Segregated America. I know, like, superficial stuff about this, I guess I should say. My partner went to school for planning. That's okay. I haven't read this. This is another one that I tried the audiobook for and it wasn't really working, so I would have to read it physically, and I just like don't make space in my reading for reading nonfiction physically. But another one that's like really important to its like kind of area of specialization, so I definitely will be getting to it, but in 2022, debatable if I'll read it this year. And I think my last one, and we're gonna end on a light note, is Screwball Television, Critical Perspectives on Gilmore Girls. This I found just kind of perusing. Okay, I haven't read this one either, but it sounds so fun. Like essay collection on Gilmore Girls. Like I want to read it. Maybe I'll try to get to that. That's like kind of fall vibes, but or Gilmore Girls at least is kind of fall vibes for me, but like I can't really commit to too much right now. So, but I do want to get to that one this year. So, okay, I didn't keep track of how many of those I read, but I'm going to say it's under half. So I will pop that up. So of 22, I read this many, which I think I'm like doing okay. Like the goal is never to read actually all of, or at least for me, it's not to read all of them in a year. It's really just to provide guidance to my nonfiction reading. Because it's something that I don't buy the physical books for very often, I'm less likely to pick them up. So I have to put like intention around picking up those books because I'm getting them from the library, I'm getting the audios, I'm getting them through different sources. So it kind of guides my reading because I can get kind of lost in the nonfiction. And I like to read a lot of nonfiction about social justice. So I kind of like having a wide array of types I can pick from and then kind of grabbing from that. But I think that's all I have for this video. Let me know if there are any that I have not yet read that you think I should prioritize. And until next time, happy reading.